Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to go through every single one of my eyeshadow palettes and kind of make comparisons between them. I have a pile of all of my colorful ones. I have separated out my neutral palettes into different kind of categories as well, and we're just going to go through them. I did take swatches of every single one of them, so you'll see some clips inserted throughout of all of the swatches. If you guys like this type of video, be sure to like and subscribe if you aren't already. I'm planning on maybe doing something similar with my blushes, bronzers, and highlighters, things like that. Just make comparisons between the products I have in my collection. So if you would like to see those types of videos, let me know in the comments down below. And with that being said, let's just hop into it. Let's start off with all of my colorful palettes. Let's start off with Pat McGrath, just because I have a few things to say about them. This first one is the Pat McGrath Mothership Mega Celestial Odyssey palette. This was a limited edition, like, holiday palette, I believe. There is something about this color story that just doesn't make sense to me. So there are very specific shades in here that I think are stunning and that I would use maybe a little bit more if the palette as a whole made more sense to me. Specifically this green one down here, which is called Citrine Envy, and this purple, like, lilac shade here, which is called Lunar Haze. I think the formula of all of them are stunning, but there's something about the layout of this, just the color story in general, that just doesn't really make sense to me. And because of that, I feel like I don't use this as much as I should, or maybe would, if there was something a little bit more cohesive about it. Like, you have these, not weird, but you have these like different pops of blue, the green obviously, and then the rest of this is kind of just like neutrals, but like, I don't know, something about this just doesn't make sense in my head, and because of that, this is probably one of my least used palettes. But like I said, this shade, this green shade here specifically, is stunning. It is very softly pressed, so the like second you touch your finger in there, it kind of moves and shifts the rest of the pigments around, but that green is honestly so stunning. I have considered like depotting a couple shades and then maybe like giving away the rest of the palette, but honestly I don't think I would reach for it then either. So I'm kind of at a loss as to what I want to do with this palette. If you guys have this palette, please let me know what you guys think of it. If you think the same thing, it just doesn't make sense to me, and I really wish it did because it wasn't cheap. So I have one more Pat McGrath palette. This is the Mothership 9 palette, Huetopian Dreams. The first thing I want to say is the outer packaging is very pretty, but it is a little bit bulky, and I think this palette is absolutely stunning. My favorite shades are definitely these two shades here, which are kind of those like super impactful shades. Those are called the Astral Venetian Orchid and Astral Amethyst Moon. So basically their astral shades are stunning. Love them. So pretty. I also think these shades are really cool. This shade down here is a duochrome. It kind of has these green purple shifts. I think the palette itself is just very much like a pinky palette, and I like the color story of this one actually. I think this one makes way more sense to me than the Mothership Mega Celestial Odyssey palette. But I feel like these palettes are so expensive that I feel like they have to be reserved for like a special occasion. I'm trying to get myself out of that mindset of like reserving specific palettes for special occasions, and I definitely don't want these to just like sit here and collect dust, especially because they are so expensive. The Mothership palettes retail for like $130. I think it's pretty. I think it's a pretty palette. I just need to force myself to wear it a lot more. Even in my No Palette Left Behind challenge, I don't think I've used this yet this year, and I definitely need to. And because the astral shades are so impactful and they're the ones that I typically reach for when I reach for this palette, it just feels way more of like a special occasion type of palette, and I think I just need to get out of that mindset. I'm gonna keep it for sure because it was very expensive, and when I do use it, I love the look I get out of it. I just don't use it as much as I should for how much I paid for it. The next palette here, you guys might have seen in my drugstore collection video. that I really only keep this because of the packaging. This is the Friends and Makeup Revolution collab, and I quite literally never reach for this palette. So it is very much like your pinks. There's a couple of different neutral shades in here, but it's your pinks and purples, and I don't wear pink and purple that often. I really only keep this for the outer packaging because it's kind of like the door frame. I think I need to be super realistic with myself and declutter it because it's not something I reach for. It is very bulky, and you could find the door frame decoration, buy that, and be reminded of Friends and not need it in an eyeshadow palette. But the packaging itself is massive. It has these like rings that open the palette, but they get stuck a lot. It's not the smartest packaging. I feel like you kind of have to like force it. The back part here is just foam. I think I need to be completely honest with myself and just get rid of this. Like, again, I don't wear these pinks and purples very often. The only reason why I am kind of considering keeping it is this silver shade right here. This shade called Big White Dog. It is a pure silver, and I don't have any other pure silvers in my collection, but I think I have a lot of similar shades that they might not be pure silver, but they are still like kind of that lighter shade. I think I just need to declutter it. The next palette I want to talk about is my Nabla Miami Lights glitter palette. It is very much a sheer chunky glitter type of palette. I know that is not everyone's vibe, which fair. It's not always my vibe either, but I have this for when I want to do like super fun looks. The glitters are honestly a little bit scratchy on your eye, so you know, not everyone wants that. I completely understand. This one is very Midnight's inspired to me, even though I know this palette came out way before Midnight's did. I think it's really pretty. I don't have any other like pure glitter palettes in my collection, and I think it's nice to have on hand for when I want to do a really fun look. This is definitely kind of like a special occasion type of palette for me. I don't reach for it that often. I am gonna keep it though, just because it is small and compact, and I reach for it for very special occasions. I'm going to talk about these two palettes in kind of the same vein. So these are both from Beauty Bay. This one is the Pastels palette, and this one is the Youtopia palette. The Pastels palette looks like this. The Youtopia palette looks like this. And you can just see they're very bright palettes. This one is definitely more vibrant and has a lot more deeper shades, a little bit more neon, like that orange is way more neon than the orange in this palette. I think these two go together very well, and I pretty much keep these for when I want to do a colorful look. I especially like these for kind of like super fun pop of color moments. Like sometimes I'll just pack one of these shades on my inner corner and call it a day, or sometimes I'll do like a full colorful look with them. It is very much a, I don't want to say special occasion because special occasion means I'm going somewhere, but it's like very much a specific vibe that I'm going for when I reach for these palettes, and I like both of them. They were also very affordable. I think when I bought these were 2 for $10, so I got both of them for like $5 each. I think the payoff is pretty good for what you're paying for them, and they are definitely powdery. The pastels especially can look a little bit chalky, but again, these were $5. I think they're fun. I like the outer packaging of them too. They're just kind of pretty, and they have magnetic closures, which I think is pretty cool, especially because they were $5 and it feels like a little bit more luxurious. I think they have like a really prominent place in my collection. These are probably my two most used like colorful palettes I have in my collection. This next palette is also from Nabla. This is the Nabla Midnight's Cutie palette. It has a little bit more just like blue vibe in general. The only shade that's not blue is this kind of like gold bronze shade right here. This looks white, but on the eyes it translates to a really light blue because of the shift it has. This shade is like a really pretty duochrome if that's the vibe that you're going for. I mean, this is not my most used palette, but I do think it's really pretty. When I do want to wear like blues, I'll reach for this. I wore this to my friend's fall wedding last year, and I thought that look was stunning because my dress was also a navy blue, and I thought it fit the vibe. This is not going to become my most used palette anytime soon, but I do like it. I like the colors in here, and I don't have these exact colors in any of my other palettes, and I really like the effects of these 3 bottom shades right here. I think they're just really pretty. They're very impactful. The duochrome is really fun. This shade is like a really light blue. I like putting this in my inner corner as well to brighten, and this shade is just like a really impactful royal blue, which I don't really have. And the last colorful palette I have is this one from Makeup Revolution. This is the Soph collab, the Super Spice palette. It has a lot of neutrals, but it also has a lot of primary colors as well. Keep this purely for when I have a specific look in mind where I need primary colors, because I don't have primary colors in any of my other palettes. It just has like the spectrum. This purple shade here, total dud. Does not show up on me whatsoever, and I think you can see that in the swatches. These aren't the most pigmented shadows. They aren't the easiest to work with, to be honest, but when I do want a look that needs like a true red, this is what I reach for. But that's pretty much it. I don't think that you really need this in your collection, especially if you have those primary colors in other palettes. The next 2 palettes I'm going to talk about are small palettes. So this first one is from Unleashia. This is the Glitterpedia palette in the olive brown colorway. I think it's really pretty. I think these shimmers are very pretty on the lid as like topper shades. It has your matte, it has your like kind of darker brown if you want to do a shadow liner. It's one of my favorite palettes in my collection right now. I think it just has like the type of look that I want, but I also think it is very similar to my M Cosmetics palette. Like, I think they have very similar vibes, and not necessarily like the colors are the same, but these 2 palettes in my mind are kind of interchangeable. If I had to pick one, I would definitely pick the Unleashia Olive Browns palette. I just like the shimmers in here a lot more. I like kind of that more glittery type of eyeshadow, especially like a topper shade. I think the mattes in the Unleashia palette are a little bit lighter, so you definitely need to work to build them up. They're not very pigmented, but I feel like that's kind of the K-beauty vibe. Like, I feel like all of the K-beauty eyeshadow looks are very soft, so I think that fits the vibes very well, and I honestly think that fits my vibes very well. I think these are very similar. This one is also way cheaper than the M Cosmetics one. I think this middle top shade right here is pretty as an eyeshadow topper, but I almost never reach for this darker brown shimmer shade, and this shimmer shade is very light, and pretty much I only wear it in my inner corners. That being said, the mattes are more pigmented than the ones in the Unleashia Olive Browns palette, but if I'm gonna go with a like K-beauty type of eyeshadow look, I would definitely reach for this. The packaging of this is also just a little bit less convenient. The like octagon, that's not an octagon, the hexagon shape is definitely a little bit more inconvenient. The triangle pans are also a little bit more hard to get your finger in if you are using your finger to apply these. These are kind of just like nitpicks though. I love both of these palettes, but I definitely appreciate and use the Unleashia Olive Browns palette more than the M Cosmetics palette, and this is way newer in my collection. If it came down to it, I would buy the Unleashia one over and over again, but I don't think I would buy the M Cosmetics one over again. I have a stack of palettes here that I think are very similar to each other or have very similar shades and vibes, so let's get into it. The first 2 I want to talk about are 2 of my favorite palettes, but they are very similar in my opinion. So the first one is my Nabla Side by Side palette. I think it has everything that I would possibly need in a palette. It has these 2 specific like duochrome shades that I think are beautiful as toppers. It has a ton of different like browns to do your crease, whatever. It has some darker browns as well if you want to do a shadow liner. It has a couple like lighter setting shades. That's this palette. It also has a couple gray tones in here, which is also prevalent in my Natasha Denona Biba palette. There's obviously a little bit of a difference here. The Natasha Denona Biba doesn't have any really pink shades, whereas the Nabla side by side definitely does. But something about these just are so similar to me. Like, they both kind of have that lid setting shade down here. They have kind of that gray and black tones at the bottom. They have the top side, or like the top part of both of these palettes kind of lean warmer and more like mustardy, but overall they are extremely similar to me. They're also both very expensive. The Natasha Denona Biba one is over $100. It's $130, and the Nabla side by side palette is around $40. If I were to choose between both of them, I would definitely go for the Nabla side by side palette. I think this one is just more versatile for what I want in an eyeshadow look, and I don't really reach for those more mustardy shades that are in the Natasha Denona Biba palette. And this used to be one of my favorite palettes because I really enjoy the cream to powder formula that Natasha Denona has, specifically the black and this dark brown here. These two shades here were pretty much my go-to like shadow liner shades just because of that cream to powder formula. They blended out really easily. Lately, with my makeup and my makeup preferences, I feel like it just doesn't excite me anymore. Whereas the Nabla side by side palette does still excite me a little bit. I feel like there's just like a little bit more variety in this one, and I feel like that makes me a little bit happier than this one. Kind of similar to the Natasha Denona Biba palette though is this one. These have a lot of like those golden mustard shades, which kind of reminds me of this one. The Maybelline Nudes in New York palette is way less expensive. I think this was maybe $14 when I bought it, but I feel like the vibes are similar. I don't reach for the Maybelline Nudes in New York palette anymore. It's not my favorite eyeshadow formula. I don't love the shimmers in here either. They're not super impactful, and I just feel like this isn't a palette that I need to have in my collection. This was the first palette that I ever bought, so it is nostalgic in that way, but again, I think I need to be totally honest with myself and kind of just like admit that I only use like 2 or 3 shades in here. I don't even really like those shades that much. So I think I'm gonna declutter this too. That kind of hurts me to say, I'm not gonna lie, but I just don't use it. I just don't think I need to hold on to something that I don't enjoy using, especially because I do have a pretty large collection of eyeshadow palettes for how little I end up wearing eyeshadow. Not my favorite palette. It's not one that I reach for, and if I am gonna go for a drugstore palette, I pretty much always choose something else in my collection than this one. I don't know why it hurts me so much. It kind of feels like closing your oldest line of credit. Like I feel like it's gonna hurt me somehow, but it's not. It's not. I think it's just time to let it go. I really just don't use it. The next palette I want to talk about is my Urban Decay Naked Wild West palette. Again, it has kind of those warmer mustardy shades, which remind me of some of the shades in Natasha Denona Biba. I like this palette a lot, actually. I don't talk about it on camera that much, but I like the color story of the cooler shades specifically. I end up using the cooler shades way more than the warmer shades in here, and these two shades, these like teal shades, are also very pretty in my opinion. Not my most used palette, but I do think the cooler tones in here are really pretty. I reach for them a lot. The Urban Decay formula isn't like the absolute greatest, like it's not anything super special in my opinion, but I like the color story of that palette. I like the outer packaging of it too. I think the snakeskin is just kind of cool, and it's the only naked palette I own, so kind of just like it for the sake of having an Urban Decay naked palette in my collection. And lastly, in this kind of category of eyeshadow palettes, I have my e.l.f. Bite Size eyeshadow quad in the shade Cream and Sugar. I think this is missing a mid-tone brown as a all over the lid shade. Like this one's just a little bit too light for me and my preferences, The shimmers I tend to mix together because I think this one is a little bit too icy on my eyes and this one is a little bit too dark for my eyes. Not dark, but like for my preference of eyeshadow, I prefer something kind of in between those two. The brown I pretty much use as a shadow eyeliner. It also reminds me of Natasha Denona Biba for the same reasons. Like the shimmers are pretty but not super impactful. These have very similar shades as well. Like if you swatch them next to each other, I think they're very similar in tones. It is nice to have an option from e.l.f. that is super small. Like I feel like this, that just broke. Yay. I did just break the brown shade a little bit, so not gonna travel with this anymore. But yeah, I think it's a good option to have. I like the colors in it. They are kind of mini versions of the Natasha Denona Biba and the Nabla Side by Side palette. I think you can find a lot of the same kind of tones and shimmers. Moving on. Hopefully I don't drop anything else. So I have 3 palettes here that are a little bit more of those cool toned neutrals. I find myself reaching for more cool toned eyeshadows lately. So the first is the Charlotte Tilbury Easy Eye palette. This is one of my favorite like all matte palettes. Well, it's my only all matte palette, but I do really like the formula in this palette. I think they're really creamy and really easy to blend out. I also like how small and compact it is. I think it's a great option for traveling. I think it's a great kind of like companion palette if you just want this and you want to bring like an eyeshadow topper or something like that. I think this is really stunning. I think it does have those little bit of like cooler tones on this side of the palette. These are a little bit warmer, but again, I think they just work well together. I like the way it looks. I don't think it's like super similar to the other 2 palettes I'm going to talk about, but I do like it, and I think the cool tones in here kind of give me the same vibes, and I think you could definitely find these shades in the bigger palette that I'm going to talk about. If not the exact same, they're just like very similar. So I guess let's just get into the other ones. The first one I want to talk about is ColourPop Going Coconuts. This is my pretty much ultimate drugstore palette. I reach for this all the time. It's my go-to travel palette. I think it has really good range in here. It has your like lid setting shade. It has your mid-tone browns for like a crease shade. It has a little bit of a darker brown for a shadow liner. These shimmers are stunning, super impactful, and super like glimmery. Unreal, honestly. And I think that palette is very similar to the new Natasha Denona I Need a New palette. This was sent to me on Skeepers, so I did not pay for this, but these retail for around $65 or $69 actually, compared to the Biba palette, which is $130. So I honestly think you're getting more bang for your buck for the mid-size palettes, and I also just kind of like this color story more than I like the Biba color story. But directly comparing them, I feel like there are a lot of similar shades in this one as this one. I need to do this in a way where I can actually show you. I feel like this brown right here is the same color pretty much as this brown right here. It has a dark brown to like do your shadow liner. It has really pretty shimmers. These shimmers are stunning. These are way more impactful than the shimmers in the Biba palette. I just think this one is so pretty. This is definitely more my vibes lately compared to the Biba palette. It's not as warm. It's not as like mustardy yellow. I think this is just a stunning palette. I think it's really pretty, and I think it is so similar to this one. I feel like there are very few shades in here that are not in this one, or vice versa. Like I feel like you can get a very similar look with both of these. Obviously you have a little bit more of a range in this palette than this palette. They're just such similar vibes. I feel like they really are. I feel like they're so similar. I like both of them. The ColourPop palette is probably my most used and like favorite palette in my collection, which is bold of me to say because I do have a lot of them. I just think this is so stunning. It just has so many pretty colors. I really like the cool tones. The shimmers are absolutely stunning, and I hope you can see that in the swatches. The shimmers in this palette are chef's kiss. For size comparison, this one is Biba and this one is the mid-size I Need a Nude palette. Like this one is just such a better deal in my opinion. I really like this, and I've only had it for a couple of days now. but I've really been liking it. This is the palette that I used today. So for today's look, I did a little bit of the shade Fair just to set my eyeshadow primer. I did a little bit of the shade Mesh, I believe. I used a little bit of Mesh to put all over the lids and in the crease. I used the shade Silhouette, this dark brown, to do like a little bit of a shadow liner just to deepen up my lash line a little bit, and then I put sheen all over my lids. I just think it's really pretty and it's really neutral and cool tone, and I think that's just been my vibe lately. So that is all of my eyeshadow palettes, all 18 of them. I am decluttering 2 of them, so at the end of this I have 16 eyeshadow palettes. I still think that's a lot, but I also really like all of the eyeshadow palettes that I have in my collection right now. I think they all kind of have their own place, and I think they all bring me a little bit of joy, and really that's all I can ask for in a collection. I think the only one that I'm not quite sure what to do with is the Pat McGrath Celestial Odyssey palette. It's just not doing it for me, and I don't know why. Like, I don't know what to do with this, and if you guys can please help me figure out how to make this feel more put together to me, please let me know in the comments down below. I really don't want this to go to waste, and it was like $75, so that's a lot of money to spend on an eyeshadow palette that I'm not really using. So I hope you guys enjoyed this type of video. Please let me know what you guys think and what your favorite eyeshadow palette is, because again, I have a lot, but I hope the comparisons kind of helped in case you have seen my collection and like was wondering which one I'd prefer, which one I'd recommend, or if you just want kind of like color dupes. Definitely not like full-on dupes, but maybe vibe dupes. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys like this video, be sure to like and subscribe if you aren't already, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye guys!